Hi everybody! Today we're going to make some Instant Pot spaghetti, and this is a little bit of a semi-homemade version, and I still make it on the stove, but sometimes you just want to have a shortcut on a weeknight and you don't want to stand over the pot and then have another pot of boiling noodles and that kind of thing. So this is a one-pot spaghetti, and it's surprisingly good for the little effort that it takes. And so the first thing that I like to do is saute my meat. And so I'll just turn on my saute function here and make sure that it's set in the normal, which is a medium heat. If you needed to adjust that, you could just hit the adjust button, and then you could get a cooler or a hotter saute temperature. And it defaults to 30 minutes. And if you ever need to extend that, then you just hit saute again. Okay, once your pot is heated up, you can go ahead and add either your oil or your meat. And what I mean by that is if you're using a lean ground beef, as most people do for spaghetti, it has enough fat in it. I usually use around 93% lean, and you can just throw it in and start sauteing it. Today I'm actually using ground turkey. I had some in the fridge that needed to get used up. It doesn't have enough fat on its own. It is 93%, but it needs just a little bit of help. So I do it just a little bit differently. So first of all, sorry about that, I go ahead and I add about a tablespoon of olive oil to the hot pot. Okay, and then I just sort of coat the bottom by tipping the pot around. And when I do ground turkey, I do my onions first. The turkey's not really going to brown anyway because there's too much of it. It'll kind of steam. So I just go ahead and throw in the onions. And I just get those going. Here's a little tip for you. If you've ever noticed that sometimes when you're stirring, your inner pot will kind of twist and turn on you. If you have one of these office binder clips, I'm not really sure what size it is, but you can, I'll put it over here, just clip it on. Let's see. There you go. You have to make sure that you get it not on the part that's protruding, but just over here. And then it just kind of holds it. It's made out of metal, so it's fine. Just obviously you're going to have to remove it before you put the lid on. But see now, it's not going to spin on you so much. So that's my little hack for the day. Those don't have to get too cooked. I just go until they're just barely starting to soften. And then go ahead and throw in your meat. And then just break it up and cook it, stirring occasionally, and get it incorporated with the onions and everything. And then also something that I like to do when I'm cooking, when I'm using herbs and spices, I like to put them in rather soon, just because when you cook spices in oil, before you get too much water in there, it helps the spices bloom and release more flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and add my spice right now. And how much and what spice you add is really going to be determined by the type of spaghetti sauce that you use. If you're using homemade and you've got it seasoned perfectly, then you might not need to add much. For myself, I really love using marinara sauce, and then I just add the spices that I want to add. You may use, one of the other commercial jarred sauces out there, and it's something that only you can tell if you like it the way it is. In my experience, I think any sauce could benefit from a little bit of something, just a little extra. So what I do, I've got it all in here, is I have some salt and pepper because my marinara sauce is low sodium. And I have about a half a teaspoon of basil. I have 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning. And I have about a teaspoon of salt. I think I already said that. And I have some pepper. I have about a half a teaspoon of pepper. I usually don't put in a lot of pepper. and a little bit of oregano, about a half a teaspoon of oregano. So again, just use what you want. If you don't want to use an onion, and go through chopping up an onion because you're, in more of a hurry or whatever, just use some onion powder. You could use about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon, depending on how oniony you like it. And toss that in. I do like to add garlic. I'm going to add it in just a couple minutes here after this browns a little, or cooks a little bit more. But if you don't want to go through dealing with smashing garlic and chopping it, then just use some garlic powder. Don't use garlic salt though. So how much garlic powder? Again, it's a personal preference. I would say at least a teaspoon, maybe 2 teaspoons maximum. But start with a teaspoon and go from there. Again, it's going to be determined by how flavorful your sauce is. And what's nice about this recipe is that you can definitely, make it yours and to your family's taste. Some people don't like onions at all, and you can leave all of that out. Okay, so we'll go ahead and let this cook up. It doesn't take too long, just a few minutes. Okay, well, the meat is coming along quite nicely, and at this point is when I would add my garlic in, and I'm using fresh garlic today, 3 cloves, and that adds a lot of really great flavor. Like I said, you can use garlic powder, and if you do, just toss it in with the other spices. You don't have to wait. Okay, so I just let the garlic cook for a minute, and this looks really good. And now we're going to do our layering process. And you want to layer the spaghetti so it has less chance of you getting the burn message. And if you've never gotten the burn message, well, A, you're lucky. It shows up right here. Let's say BURN, and that's usually because either you don't have enough thin liquid to create the steam necessary to build pressure, and so it burns, or you may not have deglazed the pan. I don't have to because I started with onion, but let's say if you start with ground beef and it gets really nice and browned, that brown bits that it leaves on the bottom of the pot, you want to make sure you scrape that off, and then you have less of a chance of getting the burn message. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start the layering process now. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is put our noodles in, and that will be our next layer. For this recipe, I use 8 ounces of noodles, of spaghetti noodles, and I do use a food scale. It's just one of those things, but in case you're wondering, it's about that much. Okay, so if you get a 32-ounce package of noodles, it's 1/4 of it. If you have a pound of noodles, then it would be 1/2 of it. Okay, and so what I'm going to do, but I can't do it with only one hand because I'm holding my camera, but I'm going to break this into thirds, and then I'm going to scatter it in there, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Okay, so as you can see, when I'm scattering these, I'm twisting and turning and kind of making it bird nest style. And the reason why is because you don't want too many of the noodles laying side by side. That gives it more surface area for them to stick together. So if you do it like this, you have less of a chance of the noodles clumping. The last couple times I've made this, I've had 0 clumping, but every once in a while I do get some. It's just the way it is. So you just go in there with a fork or something and just pull them apart. It's really not that big of a deal. And also right now, before I forget, I'm going to take off my clip because I don't have to stir anymore. Okay, and then we'll do the next step. Okay, and if you've ever made my meatball pasta dish, you know that I like to throw in a can of diced tomatoes. It makes it a little bit chunkier. It also just adds that little bit of extra moisture that is good for the noodles. So I just use one 14.5-ounce can of diced tomatoes, and then when I pour it on here, I just try to kind of get it evenly on here as much as possible. Just distribute it, and I use the juice and all. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, it's a little bit dark. I'll brighten that up just a little bit. Okay, and then next we'll go the spaghetti sauce. So I just use a 24-ounce jar, and again, mine's marinara sauce. Use whatever you like. And then I'm going to just pour it on here as evenly as possible and you want to cover up the noodles, because they'll get the moisture and then they'll cook. If the noodles are exposed, they're not going to cook very well. So they're going to be a little bit, maybe more al dente than you would like. Okay. There we go. And then the very last step before we cook it is I add 2 cups of broth. Now you can use water, that's perfectly fine. I just figure since the noodles are going to absorb everything, may as well use something tasty like broth. And so what I'm doing is I'm pouring it kind of down the inside of the pot, and I'll go around and do that. That way I don't wash the sauce off of the top of the noodles. There we go. And then I just sort of push down with my spoon. I'm sorry it's a little bit dark in there. I can't seem to get it any lighter. Alright. And then just sort of make sure that they're all covered up. Alright. And then as they cook, they'll soak down into the liquid there. Okay, so we're not going to stir this. This is just layers of yumminess, and then we'll go ahead and we'll cook it. So make sure your sealing ring is in there perfectly, and then close your pot, don't for the sealing position. And then since your saute mode was still on, what you want to do is you want to turn it off, however your pot works that way, cancel or whatever. So to set the time, I have an older one, so I use manual, and then I'm going to use the plus or minus button, in this case the plus button, because I want to take it up to 8 minutes. If you have a pressure cook button, then you're going to want to use that, or if you have an ultra, you might have the dial, and then the dial, I think it's up here somewhere on the display, it'll say pressure cook, and you want high pressure, and then 8 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and let that cook. Okay, so all the steam is out. We can go ahead and open it up. Woo! Get a nice little steam bath here. Okay, and then now all we want to do is get in there and just stir it. It's going to look really liquidy at first. Whoa, sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Now I like my spaghetti a little bit saucy. It does thicken up a little bit as it cools. I hope you can see that. Look at that. I don't see any noodles stuck together. Ooh, of course you can't either with the steam. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so this looks really good. This is perfect, in my opinion. Meaty, saucy. And then at this point, just give it a taste and decide if you want to adjust your salt or whatever. And if for some reason your noodles weren't done, all you would have to do is just set the lid back on. Don't even have to vent it or seal it or anything. Just leave it on and just let the spaghetti sit in there for a few minutes. This 8-minute time with a quick release, which is what I did, yields a pretty soft noodle. If you like a more al dente noodle, then you'll probably want to go maybe 6 or 7 minutes. But for me, I like my noodles nice and soft, not mushy, just soft. And that's what I got here. So this is my kind of spaghetti. And with the 8 ounces of noodles, you're going to end up with just about a half a pot, as you can see here. So that'll easily be for 5 servings, maybe. If you don't have too much, you could probably get 6 servings out of this pretty easily. And I think it's safe to say that you could do 12 to 16 ounces of pasta in here. Just whatever increment you do, like if you decide to do 16 ounces of pasta, that's doubling it. So just double the recipe. Instead of 2 cups of liquid, use 4 cups. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that you could throw in mushrooms. If you had some mushrooms, you could have thrown those in with the sauce. I think what I would have done is put them on top of the noodles and then put the tomatoes and then the spaghetti sauce on top of that. And you could throw in, you know, maybe sneak in some zucchini. It would be very, very soft, but if you're trying to sneak veggies in for your kids or for yourself, you know, you could do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plate it up and I'm going to put some Parmesan cheese on it, and I have lunch. So thank you for watching, and I really hope you enjoy this Instant Pot spaghetti. Super easy to make and very delicious. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.